On today's Edge of Wonder, we recently discussed how, in a non-Hollywood, undead way, vampires are in fact real. So if we continue down this avenue of exploration, it seems only appropriate to ask, what about werewolves? For countless centuries, where wolves were to blame for the slaughter of entire flocks of sheep, many were convinced werewolves were the actual culprits. Where what? Werewolves? Where who? Where's that howling coming from? Is it possible for some humans to be so cursed that they could actually morph into beasts that roam the earth at night, seeking to devour human flesh? In this episode, we examine accounts from ancient lore to modern myth in an attempt to reconcile one of the biggest superstitions of our day, the werewolf. Join us now for the final installment of the Maps and Myths series on the Edge of Wonder.
Welcome to the Edge of Wonder. We're your hosts. I'm Rob.
I'm Ben.
Did you know that werewolves have a proper scientific name? They're called lycanthropes, and the ability to transform into a werewolf is lycanthropy.
There's even a sickness called clinical lycanthropy, where people have a form of madness that makes them think they're werewolves and have the need to feed on human flesh. Like vampires, stories of shape-shifting humans exist in almost every culture.
We don't do this often here, but we're going to make a prediction. As all of this deep state stuff comes to light and people start going through a huge spiritual awakening, people will not only start to accept possible supernormal explanations for things, but they'll also stop thinking the ancients were naive.
Yeah. People will be reading ancient texts with a new view, and then they'll start creating their own books. In the spirit of that, what did the ancients say about werewolves, and does it actually make sense? Let's dive deep and see what we found out.
One of the absolute first stories of werewolves is the story of King Lycaon, and he's an important one, so we're gonna tell that story here.
King Lycaon of Arcadia ascended the throne from one of the first mortals said to walk on Earth. There are different versions of the story, but we'll focus on the one related to werewolves.
Lycaon was seen as a mischievous king. To test him, Zeus descended, disguising himself as a common laborer. As people interacted with Zeus, they started seeing his divinity and began worshiping him.
So Lycaon, in his arrogance, decided he'd test the so-called god to see if he was omnipotent.
He made arrangements for a large banquet and sacrificed a child whose body was boiled and roasted and prepared into the main course. In one version of the story, it was Lycaon's own son that was sacrificed.
When the meal was served, Zeus saw what was prepared for him. He then revealed himself and flipped the table in a wrathful anger. Zeus then struck down Lycaon's children. Lycaon, seeing this, fled, and as he fled, Zeus transformed him into a half-wolf, half-human creature.
The son that was sacrificed by Lycaon was then resurrected, and he became the heir to the throne of Arcadia.
Lycaon believed that he was above the gods. He thought so highly of himself that he thought he could get away with feeding a god of his own sacrificed children with no repercussions at all.
Yeah.
That's crazy. But Zeus cursed him by showing that if he were to act like an animal, that he would be cursed to become one.
In Plato's Republic, Book 8, Plato references this myth directly to make a point about tyrants. It says, quote,
that once someone tastes a bit of human innards mixed up with other sacrifices, he becomes a wolf by necessity.
Petronius, a courtier during King Nero's reign, has a pretty amazing count as well. Easier to quote here.
My master had gone to Capua to sell some old clothes. I seized the opportunity and persuaded our guest to bear me company about 5 miles out of town, for he was a soldier and as bold as death. We set out about cockcrow, and the moon shone bright as day, when, coming among some monuments, my man began to converse with the stars, whilst I jogged along singing and counting them. Presently, I looked back after him and saw him strip and lay his clothes by the side of the road. My heart was in my mouth in an instant. I stood like a corpse when in a crack he was turned into a wolf. Don't think I'm joking. I would not tell you a lie for the finest fortune in the world.
There's more to the story, but we've got to keep moving. Next up is the Greek historian and traveler Herodotus, who said,
"It seems that the Nuri are sorcerers. If one is to believe the Scythians and the Greeks established in Scythia, for each Nurian changes himself, once in the year, into the form of a wolf, and he continues in that form for several days, after which he resumes his former shape."
The Book of Werewolves, written by Sabine Baring-Gould in the 1890s, still holds as the most notable book on werewolves to date.
In some of these stories, the skins of beasts were put on, and when combined with a ring of some sort, men could turn into werewolves.
In some of these Norse stories, berserkers would also put on the skin of a wolf or bear and take on their characteristics, even foaming at the mouth while in a berserker charge.
Speaking of bears, some of the stories in Sabine's book includes men that could shape-shift into werebears. Not Care Bears, werebears. And one of the most disturbing stories, an old king named Hring, who already had a son named Bjorn, had his men go abroad looking for a wife for him. They eventually came upon a mysterious woman named Hvit.
They brought her back and the king got married. Several years later, the queen Hvit made a few passes at Bjorn, who rejected her. So she cursed him and turned him into a werebear who was forced to roam the night with an insatiable hunger for flesh and eat the sheep in his father's kingdom. Then she had the bear slain by the king's men and made Bjorn's girlfriend eat him.
Are we starting to see any connections here with flesh eating?
Remember, the deep state took the most potent forms of sorcery and occult power and witchcraft from every culture in the world. If you haven't seen our Bloodlines of the Deep State videos, you should probably go do that.
Much of the occult arts that were passed, the very arts that these 13 families pulled from, came from pagan witchcraft. What was the culture in these areas before Christianity spread to them? Paganism. What was Jesus really fighting against?
There was a smorgasbord of things going on, rituals, curses, spells, etc. Speaking of witchcraft, in our last episode on vampires, we discussed a man who claimed to be a real-life ex-vampire, Bill Schnoebelen.
Now remember, Bill's involvement and understandings of werewolves and vampire came from being involved in witchcraft and then getting himself involved in a satanic cult.
While moving up in the ranks, he eventually made it to what he called the 7th degree in his cult. His satanic higher-ups at this point gave him a choice. He could either become a vampire and drink of the blood, or become a werewolf and eat of the flesh. In a series called Interview with an Ex-Vampire, Bill describes werewolves.
Well, a werewolf is an individual who's usually, the technical term is a lycanthrope, a shapeshifter, and they're usually individual. It's very high up in the black arts and has achieved an incredible amount of demonic possession. In other words, they're very highly possessed by demons, and they basically have the ability at will to transform from a normal human being into this gigantic wolf-like thing that's between 7 and 8 feet tall, weighs more on fear of pounds, and can rip your head off.
Bill also clarifies in his public interviews and lectures common misconceptions about werewolves. He says that a full moon isn't needed and that they can change whenever they want. However, he did say that silver really does work on werewolves because there are holy properties to silver.
What's interesting is that there are a lot of startups right now using silver in really interesting things, like pillowcases and towels, because it keeps them from smelling due to the bacteria that can easily accumulate. Also, science says that the effect is amplified by an electric field. So if I shoot a werewolf with a silver bullet and then Thor comes down and strikes it with lightning, it would definitely explode.
I don't think
But
Thor
I
needs you
digress.
to kill a werewolf for him, though.
Pretty awesome.
Bill also said that a bite doesn't pass on the werewolf gene and that only people that have gone through the rituals are able to become one.
Bill was told that while he was in the Brotherhood of Satan, that this was the assassin squad and guard of the Brotherhood.
Bill went on to say that as a minister, he had several cases where people claimed to have seen werewolves or asked for assistance. He also mentioned that his wife had seen one too. He did, however, say that he had never seen one himself, but that he has seen other were-animals, which he likens to skinwalkers.
Interestingly, many of the sightings of werewolves are very similar. In a History Channel documentary, it's recounted that in August of 2005, in Dayton, Ohio, Adam Davis and Tammy Williams claimed to have seen a werewolf. One night, they heard a terrifying sound outside of their farmhouse.
Adam likened the sound to be a combination between a wolf and a human scream at the same time. When Davis went to go check on this, he looked out the window and locked eyes with this thing that had blazing red eyes in the cornfield just outside his front door.
It was a massive wolf-like creature standing on its hind legs. Davis said that it was about 7 to 8 feet tall. He knows because the corn at the time in summer was about 9 feet tall.
They also heard howlings and were told not to go looking out for sources of the howlings. Next, let's talk about some of the most famous werewolf confessions in history. They seem to line up with some of the other cases and descriptions.
Please watch your step on the edge of wonder.
One of the most famous cases in history of lycanthropy is Peter Stube, the Werewolf of Bedburg. To make a long story kind of short, in the 1590s, a pamphlet started to be circulated about Stube's case.
According to the pamphlet, Stube made a pact with the devil. He promised his malice on men, women, and children in exchange for the gift of turning into a ravenous, greedy wolf beast. The devil obliged and gave him a belt.
The pamphlet said that over a 25-year period, Stube murdered and ate various victims. He was even charged with having incest with his daughter and eating his own son.
Sorry for these gross details, guys. But when Stube was finally captured, he confessed in full to his deal with the devil and the magic belt. Among his charges were murder, incest, and cannibalism. But get this, he was put to death on October 31st, 1589 in Bedburg.
Halloween
night.
Germany dealt him an incredibly torturous death, ending with a wolf's body being hung up in public with Stube's head put on top of it. I guess this was to warn other Germans what would happen if they practiced werewolf witchcraft.
Of course, modern historians say that Stube was a victim of a political agenda and they are all ridiculous and, blah, 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 and the rest of it.
One of the most compelling accounts was given in the Book of Werewolves of a man named Pierre Bourgault and a man named Michael Verdun.
19 years before the trial, Bourgault and his flock of sheep were caught on the countryside when a terrible storm struck.
Bourgault's flock scattered and ran for the hills. He labored to round them up but was unsuccessful. That is, until he was approached by a black rider on horseback.
The black rider told him to lift his spirits and that if Bourgault would but rely upon him, he should see his flock back together very soon, and was also promised money. He soon found his entire flock collected together and agreed to meet the man again in 5 days' time.
When Bourgault met him a second time, he learned that the Black Rider was an agent of the devil. He said,
I renounced Christianity, kissed his left hand, which was black and ice cold as that of a corpse. Then I fell on my knees and gave my allegiance to Satan.
The man's name he found out was Moisette.
So 2 years passed and he began to tire of the devil's service. So he began to attend church again. But he was brought back into the fold by a man named Michael Verdun.
In a wood near Chassel, Charnon, we met with many others whom I did not recognize. We danced and each had in his or her hand a green taper with a blue flame. Still under the delusion that I should obtain money, Michel persuaded me to move with the greatest celerity. In order to do this, after I had stripped myself, he smeared me with a salve, and I believed myself then to be transformed into a wolf. I was at first somewhat horrified at my 4 wolf's feet, and the fur with which I was covered all at once. But I found that I could now travel with the speed of the wind. This could not have taken place without the help of our powerful master, who was present during our excursion. Though I did not perceive him till I had recovered my human form, Michel did the same as myself. When we had been 1 or 2 hours in this condition of metamorphosis, Michel smeared us again, and quick as thought, we resumed our human forms. The salve was given us by our masters. To me, it was given by Moisette. To Michel, by his own master, Guillaume.
Like, what? I mean, this is weird because one of how specific his confession is. I mean,
So the story goes on to describe many brutal killings of children, which we will not recount here because Ben gets scared.
there is kids watching this. So they were eventually caught because court actually released a statement allowing those that were willing in the area to
assemble with pikes, halberds, arquebuses, and sticks to chase and to pursue the said werewolf in every place where they may find or seize him.
Anyway, it wasn't long before the werewolf, or loup-garou, was caught. Yep, that's the word for werewolf in French, and it's about the cutest thing we've ever heard. Hey Ben, I heard your brother saw one of these? What happened?
So my brother's like very skeptical, right? He doesn't like, he believes in this stuff, like especially what we're doing, but he questions everything and he doesn't take it at face value for sure, right?
Right.
So him and his wife decided to go down to Louisiana. They were just
yeah.
they like wanted to go on the back roads. It was at night. They were driving, and she first saw something on the side of the road. And first they were like, "Oh, it's like a coyote or something," right? And my brother described this thing. It was on the side of the road. They were driving, and it like stood up on like hind legs,
Yeah.
right? And it had these glowing red eyes, and he said it was about 8 feet tall.
Whoa.
And
This
then
is like exactly
yeah,
like
this
the
is
other-
exactly it. And this is the rougarou that
The loup-garou, yeah.
No, loup-garou, yes,
Yeah.
that everyone talks about. And
in Louisiana, you know, they speak French down there, so they call it loup-garou.
Exactly. So it happened so fast, and then it like ran away. You know, went off the side of the road and went into the woods and whatnot.
Yeah.
So he said by the time they were trying to get out the phones and
Take a photo.
it was already gone. So they go back into the town, and they're kind of asking people about this, and he's like everyone, especially in that area, because where they were was like a small area, like everyone knows each other and stuff, and everyone's like, oh yeah, you saw it, like everyone there knows about it.
Wow.
So-
And you know, the weirdest thing about that area is there is so much voodoo. It's like the voodoo capital of America down there,
Yeah,
right?
it is.
So voodoo is a very powerful form of witchcraft, apparently, according to Bill Schnobelin. So maybe that's what's going on.
Maybe. And yeah, and everyone knows about very paranormal things happening there.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just very normal. Everyone like talks about it, like yeah,
Openly, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and like they just know about it. So I'm from Columbus, Ohio. I can tell you a lot of weird things happen in Dayton. But
I've seen a lot of weird things happening in Ohio.
there's
in
a
general.
lot of weird stuff happening in Ohio. So eventually we'll get there and do whole episodes about
I think we should,
Ohio.
right? That whole area, and even into Kentucky and West Virginia.
Yeah, all my friends know about it too.
About what?
Ohio.
Weird people in West Virginia. So, are werewolves real? I mean, it's up to you to look into this yourselves, but if you ask us, we're gonna say yes. Why?
Because all a werewolf is a skinwalker. Bill Schnobelin said that the reason why someone would decide to change into a werewolf instead of other animals is because of the extraordinary smelling capability along with the intelligence of the wolf.
Transforming into something was connected to witchcraft, which we're really not exactly sure of the power of, especially when possession gets mixed into this.
Not only are skinwalkers seen and discussed all over the United States, but they also have existed in China for centuries, where foxes and snakes were known to possess humans, and some would even shapeshift into them. But hey, that's a whole different episode, right? But who wants to see an episode on skinwalkers? We know you guys
Comment below and let us know. And until next time, we'll see you out.
on the edge of a full moon.
Had to do it.
Ex-vampire Bill Schnobelin.
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 Yeah.
Bill Schnobelin.
Nope.
Is that the one? Is this the one? What about this one? You see, I'm searching to find the appropriate settings so the sounds are just right for this series episode, South Werewolves and stuff. So let's do this thing.